It's 6 o'clock Eastern on Wednesday. We've got a full NBA slate, and that means it's time for a Heat Check. Welcome into Action Network's Heat Check, presented by BetMGM. I'm Matt Moore, senior NBA writer, joined by professional bettors Raheem Palmer and Preston Johnson, bringing you the best in picks, sides, totals, props, everything that you need to know to bet the NBA slate on Wednesday. Glad to have you with us. Also glad to let you know that as we started last week for this season, for the 2021-22 season, who's got two thumbs in this 2-0? It's this guy. Who else went 2-0 last? Oh, no, that's right. I'm the only one to go 2-0 last week, boys. But I'm sure your luck is sure to change. As we get started tonight, do want to go ahead and talk about the fact that there's been an interesting start to the season in that offensive rating is actually considerably down. Offensive rating is often lower to start a season, but at 106, it's 6 points lower than the average last season. That's the lowest since 2016. Even accounting for a slow start, it does seem like there's been some truncation of offense early on in the season. Preston Johnson, as a bettor, what do you make of where the offenses are in the NBA to start this season?
So last week, one of the main things that we talked about at the beginning was what's something you're looking at to start the NBA season from a betting perspective. I mentioned the fouling, which I think Raheem's going to dive into more concretely here in a minute. It is down some. There aren't as many fouls. So that's part of it. I also wanted to kind of dive further, like, okay, well, what else could play a part here? Because this is a pretty drastic change. And the first thing you need to look at for looking at short samples, which 3 or 4 games is definitely a short sample, is how well teams are shooting from three. And it was really like just blatantly obvious, and it should be pretty easy for everyone to grasp. But there are 14 teams this year shooting worse from three than the absolute worst 3-point shooting team last season, which was the Cavs at 33.6%. 14 teams, half the league nearly, shooting worse than the worst team from three last year. So what explains that? Honestly, it's 3 or 4 game sample. It's going to balance out. I'm not too worried. I actually think going into this, I was expecting that to be less severe and think, okay, it really could be the free throw shooting, which is playing a part for sure. But there's just half the league just shooting really poorly from three. That's probably going to change. Now, could you say part of it is defenses are now trying to play the three in a different way? And like, they saw what the Knicks did last year with Thibodeau, and all the opponents were shooting poorly from three, and they're trying to steal some of that. Maybe there's something there, but you're not going to have teams like the Pistons and OKC Thunder shooting 22% from three this year. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's the major factor here so far. So nothing to really take too seriously yet.
Yeah, you wonder about, teams able to play up defensively there. You also wonder about the impact of having fans back in the arena. Some teams literally did not have any fans in the arena at all last season. We saw in the bubble better shooting rates. So you got to wonder if there's some sort of connection there, but you're right. It's probably just sample and it'll even out. One thing, though, don't dare the Thunder to shoot 22% for the season, Preston, because they will do whatever it takes to get that draft pick. Raheem, when you look at the early season offensive results, where does your mind go in terms of trying to cap these things?
My mind goes to the free throws. I mean, right now you're looking at the free throws are down to 19.9 per game. Last season, we were at 21.8. We're at 19.5 per 100 possessions. That's the lowest in NBA history. But I look at some of the individual players. James Harden he's getting the bulk of this right now. He's been averaging 10 free throws a game for the last 9 seasons since he's been at Houston. This year, he's just down to 3 free throws a game. When you look at Trae Young, he's another one who's capitalized on being able to throw his body into defenders. And he's going from averaging 9 free throws a game the last 2 seasons to just 5.3. And I think we're seeing a lack of continuation fouls called. I just think the individual scorers in this league, they're not getting the fouls that they normally would in previous years. So I think that's something to look for.
There's been always kind of this idea that there's the areas of emphasis that they start off really focusing on, and by midseason they go back to the old ways. Yeah. I will say maybe different this season because the actual feedback that they're getting is that fans really like this style of basketball. It's not too sluggish. It's not too gross. It just feels competitive. It feels a little bit more balanced. And I think that's causing the games overall have been pretty high quality, but it does explain why we're seeing unders so successful. They're 32 and 22, 59%. Going under by 4.23 points per game. So unders have definitely been the lean early this season. All right, let's get into it. Best bets for the night. Let's pick and roll here. Take a pick and roll with it. Raheem Palmer, what is your best bet, side or total for the night?
Well, you guys know, if you followed me last season, I typically like to bet against human achievement. I'm typically a guy who's on the under, but the Memphis Grizzlies, they like to go over. They are the exception to the rule right now. My model makes this game 242. The Blazers, who is their opponent for the night, they're playing at the fastest pace in the league at 107 0.5 possessions. When you look at the Memphis Grizzlies, they're first in offensive rating, 123 points per 100 possessions, and they're last in defensive rating at 117 points per 100 possessions. You look at this Blazers defense, they can't stop a nosebleed either. And then when you look at the offense, they've really been kind of struggling, but I think this Grizzlies defense is going to be the perfect elixir for them to step up. Last season, they were second in offensive rating at 119 points per 100 possessions. Damian Lillard has really been struggling. He's at 17 points on 36% shooting. You have to expect him to regress at some point. I think it's going to happen tonight. We're going to go over 234, and we're going to buck the under trend that we're seeing in the league right now.
I like it. We just told you why offenses are down. The first thing that Raheem has to say is going to be a lot of points scored in this game. But look, I love it. We talked about this on our Buckets podcast, which you should go subscribe to right now. We do our Wednesday workshop, and this was one that we looked at. For me, it comes down to the half-court offenses. That's why I love this pick. You're talking about the second and sixth best half-court offenses in the NBA, and the 23rd and 28th ranked half-court defenses. Now, Memphis has faced a lot of good offenses, so has Portland. But the overall numbers, with Portland having that bad game versus the Clippers and still being second, they're still putting up points even when Damian Lillard hasn't necessarily shot well from the field. So I absolutely love this pick. I'm with you. I am on it. Great pick to start. Preston, I understand that you also are interested in this particular contest.
I am, man. Look, the narrative speak is like maybe Dame's just going through the motions. Maybe, he's worried about getting out of Portland, the trade stuff. Like, here's the thing. First game, home loss to Sacramento. He goes 0 for 9 from 3. It was his second worst three-point shooting performance of his life, including Weber State, probably high school too. Then they bounce back. They beat the Suns at home by 30. Then they go into LA against the Clippers. They lose by 30. He goes 0 for 8. He has his third worst shooting performance from 3 of his life. Two of his 3 worst in a matter of 3 games. I think the narrative is, look, Dame doesn't really care. Like, let's be honest. He cares about winning. He's trying to score when he shoots the ball. He's trying to play better. My numbers are a little higher. I know Norman Powell is questionable. He has some knee soreness. I expect him to play. Even if he doesn't, I think this should be higher than 3 with him playing. I have it closer to 4. So at 2.5, there's even some that are still 2 out there in the market. It's a buy low. And I should say real quick too, when you look at kind of shot quality versus expectation on effective field goal percentage this year so far, Portland's a team mostly because of Dame that expects to trend up, and Memphis has, I think, been the 5th or 6th most lucky, if you want to call it. And a lot of that has to do with Ja Morant, who I think most people are saying he could be all NBA this year. He's averaging 35 and 8. If he does that again, this probably is a fair line. I just expect regression down on the Memphis side some, and at least a positive regression on the Dame Lillard side for Portland. So just got to roll with it. And I think it's just a number that, buying low in 2 months, if Memphis really is this legit and Ja is a top guy, this is probably pick, and I'm wrong. But we only have 3 games to go off of, and I'm going to trust everything else we've seen from Dame and Portland the last few years and just lay the 2.5.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting matchup. Portland's trying a different scheme, playing at the level in pick and roll. And I think that's what's the word for this? The worst idea anyone could ever have about building a defense with this team. But Chauncey Billups knows a lot more about basketball than I do. I don't know that the Grizzlies are well positioned to punish it. Jaren Jackson's not great off of the dribble in short roll situations. Neither Steven Adams. He's okay, but making that kick out to the corner is not necessarily excellent. You can probably argue that DeAnthony Melton and Desmond Bane have played a little bit over their heads. Plus, I do think you're actually getting a pretty sizable bench advantage here. Portland's bench has been pretty good to start this season. I think they'll continue to be pretty good. I have this at 3, so I'm not going to play it, but I can't hate it, especially at home. Portland's numbers also got nuked by that Clippers game. If they hadn't had that performance, that's probably not impacting things as much, and they probably project out here at a higher number. And so we just say, okay, look, they had a bad game versus the Clippers. We can take that one and chuck it. I can definitely see this one being with, especially one possession at home. I think that's pretty good for teams of equal range. These teams are expected to be pretty equal at home. More experience. Portland's offense has been good. I can't hate that pick at all. For my pick here on Best Bets, I'm taking the Wizards plus 4.5 versus the Boston Celtics in Boston. I'm addicted to the Wizards, and it's a problem. Took them versus the Nets, and I still think that that was the right cap, and that Bradley Beal just had an absolutely atrocious game. Thanks for that, Bradley. I actually have the Wizards as a slight favorite here. Now, I mentioned the numbers getting nuked. Boston's numbers got nuked by their loss to the Raptors last Friday. That absolutely warped their numbers. But even if I adjust for that, then I still think that this number is too high. Washington, surprisingly, 4 games, whatever, but They are top 10 in both half-court offense and half-court defense. I care a lot about half-court numbers, as you can tell, because that's where the majority of teams spend their time, and because it's not as dependent on turnovers or how the other team performs. Like, you're going to get the ball, you will have a chance to operate in half-court. How do you do on both ends of the floor? And the Wizards have been surprisingly good. I actually think that this is a sneaky good team in terms of its veterans that are on court. They're just capable. And I really like the job that Wes Unseld Jr. is doing. I think maybe he's an advantage that isn't getting reflected in the market. This looks more like last year's numbers. Boston hasn't been as impressive as we maybe thought they would be, especially the bench. The bench has been pretty bad, and that has me a little bit concerned. Boston's 23rd in pick and roll defense. If you watch the way that they're covering things, they're giving up a lot of open shots at the rim. They get pretty lost in coverage. Marcus Smart is overplaying things. Dennis Schroeder has not looked good on defense. Surprise, surprise. Robert Williams' defensive numbers are good on his own, and they do have Al Horford back for this contest, so that makes me a little bit nervous. But ultimately, I like the Wizards' edge on the bench. I think the Wizards are better than expected. I think the Celtics are still very uneven, and I'm going to take the Wizards plus 4.5 as my best bet on the night. All right, time for the wheel. On the wheel every week, we have a number of props that we select in the morning, and it's going to randomly generate one of them for us. We have to take a side, whether over or under. We always start with Raheem Palmer. Raheem, are you ready?
I'm born ready. Let's go.
All right, born ready. Let's hit it. Spin the wheel for Raheem Palmer. Tyler Halliburton, over or under 4.5 assists for the Sacramento Kings. Raheem.
I'm going with Tyrese Halliburton, over 4.5 assists. Look, he's playing the Suns team. They're just 27 for defensive rating. They're giving up 116 points per 100 possessions this season. But when you look at Tyrese Halliburton, he's averaging 6.3 assists per game, and he has an assist every 5.4 minutes. In his rookie season, he averaged 5.3 assists, and he only started 20 games. And he was just coming off the bench. So when his 20 starts, you saw his assists rise to about 6 assists per game. So I just think he has a track record of going over this total. I think this price way too low. So let's go over. The best thing about this prop is that you're only laying 105 at BetMGM. So we got to take that.
I think I have this. I think I have an under on this play, or at least I have projected as such. I don't think I'm going to play it. So I'm a little bit nervous about it. I don't know what to make of Phoenix. I don't know what to make of Phoenix. The other thing I would tell you is you're betting on the Kings. And anytime that you're betting on the Kings, I think you made a terrible mistake. I just don't think that we should ever get involved in the chaos generator that is the Sacramento Kings. But the wheel did choose for you, so I will go with it. I like Tyler Halliburton. That's a pretty good pick. Preston Johnson, are you ready for the wheel?
I am. Let's roll.
All right, let's roll it.
We'll spin. Yeah.
Damian Lillard.
Oh no!
Over
I
under.
get to double down on this take now.
Oh wow!
How many props can we get on one game and then in one show? Let's see.
All right, so it's 27.5 or 28.5, depending on the market price. Look, he averaged 29.5 the last 2 seasons combined against probably better defensive situations, at least from what we've seen Memphis so far. Raheem, I believe you said they're dead last so far in defensive rating. They don't project out to be the worst defense in the NBA, but to this point, and they're going up against a good Portland offense, especially if Norm Powell doesn't play. This isn't an awful hedge where Dame's usage goes up some there. 27.5 is just a couple points too low, so just got to roll with it. It's Dame time. 40 plus tonight. They get the W, and he gets his points over the 27.5.
Producers, I'm going to ask you go ahead and GIF Preston tapping the wrist for time. I'm going to need that as a GIF for my Twitter exploits. What
production is on it. Yeah.
The one thing I really like is that Dylan Brooks is out of this contest as well. So I just think obviously their defense should be a little bit better with him in the lineup, and he's out right now. So
yeah, he would definitely be checking Dame. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm kind of with you that if you're gonna, like, it's probably smart to just start betting on the Dame regression. Like, there's no reason to think that Dame's going to continue. Like, of all the things that Dame's going to continue to struggle with, shooting, really, and there's no sign that he's actually like. You mentioned the narrative. There's no reason to think that he's going through the motions. That's not how he's wired. I'm with you on this. I like this pick. All right, my turn on the wheel. Can I get a spin, please? All right, Jonas Valanciunas, points and rebounds, 29.5. Okay. In the last 5 meetings, he has gone under this mark in 4 of the last 5 versus Clint Capella, who is a surprisingly good defender, at least this season. And he's good at rebounding. So fewer offensive rebounds for Jonas Valanciunas. Plus, when you look at how the Pelicans are playing, they're playing a combination of coverages. They're playing a little bit more drop, but Valanciunas will probably wind up on switches a little bit more, which will bring him out. I have this projected under on the game, so I think this is going to be a little bit tough scoring for him. Also, if you look at it, the numbers, the Hawks have allowed the fewest points to centers per game this season of any team in the league. They have just done a great job battling centers and keeping them off of the board. I think Valanciunas is a really good player and he's been terrific, but his numbers on the season, which project out to basically this, are boosted by the fact that he played 2 games versus the Wolves coverage. The Wolves play heavily in pick and roll at the level of the screen, which means that the big, once he slips, gets wide open floaters, wide open shots at the rim, lots of easy stuff once the coverage breaks down. So that explains why Valanciunas' numbers were bumped up. This is just a little bit high to me. I will take the under on Jonas Valanciunas, Grizzlies legend, at 29.5 points and rebounds.
One point I want to add on Capella, you mentioned he's been good defensively so far this year. He actually graded out all the all-in-one metrics last season as the second most prolific defending big man outside of Rudy Gobert, who's just always first forever. Like Capella at Atlanta's defense was last year surprisingly great. And so it's carrying over. I don't think it was necessarily fluky at this point. Good read on this one. I like it. I'm with you.
Big key on this, DeAndre Hunter will play. That helps me in the drop coverage that they're going to play because they're not switching as much with Capella, which is good because it leaves them on an island. So I like this pick as well. All right. To know axiom in betting, you got to fade the public. You're supposed to fade the public. You're not supposed to go with the public. You're supposed to go against them. But our followers at Action Network are always pretty sharp. Every week we ask you a side or prop on the games of the night. Tonight, it's Heat Nets, huge game for early in the season. This one, Heat looking very, very impressive. Obviously, after that big win over the Bucks, Nets struggling a little bit here. So we ask you, plus 3.5 is the number. It was at 4.5 when we were talking about it yesterday on buckets. It's now 3.5. You still took the Heat, 69.3%, nice, on the Heat to go ahead and cover tonight. Raheem, are you going to back the public and take the Heat? Are you going to fade them and go with the Brooklyn Nets, the favorites to win the NBA title?
The heat is on. What they say in Beverly Hills Cop, the heat is on. We're going to roll with the Heat. Look, I took the Heat +5 yesterday. This is down to +3.5. I honestly think they win this game outright. When you look at this Nets team, they are really, really struggling in the absence of Kyrie Irving. And a large part of it is James Harden. We spoke about James Harden earlier. It struggles with getting to the line. But when you look at him, it's like his time in Houston, he's almost become like a character of the analytics era. He pretty much shot step back threes and he got to the rim. Well, this year he's shooting a career low at the rim. 25% of his field goal attempts are coming at the rim. He can't really drive to the basket in ways that he did before. I've seen some people on Twitter actually compare him to Deron Williams and Baron Davis after they lost some of his quickness. Now, I'm not willing to go there, but he's struggling right now. 17 points per game on 36% shooting. They really lack playmaking, and the offense is just not where it needs to be. They had 102 points per one possession for Harden on the floor, and defensively, this team is still struggling. I think the Heat right now, they're rolling on both sides of the floor, and I think this is a championship contender in the East that wants to go out there and prove themselves, and I think this is the time to catch the Brooklyn Nets slipping. So I'm going to go with the Heat +3.5. I think they probably win this game outright, so you can sprinkle something on the money.
Nice. I especially like the Beverly Hills Cop reference. My favorite part of that movie is when he's like, "Akwel Foley." That's my favorite part of that. Most people probably watching this are not old enough to know that movie exists. Preston, are you with the public or are you fading? Are you with the Nets or Heat +3.5?
I will fade Raheem and the public. Look, okay, this is what's interesting. I'm not betting this game. So for context, we're doing this for fun. We like to put up the poll. It's probably close to fair. I have it closer to where the 4.5 was this morning. I'll say this. It's interesting to see the actual overall market from like who's going to win the East, who's going to win the title, be so heavy Brooklyn, like by far the favorites, right? They're only 3.5 at home to the Heat. Like, so there's some disconnect. Is it because they're just going through the motions themselves, treating these first few games like preseason games? Harden's out of shape. He's not getting to the rim as much. He's not getting to the free throw line as much. He's also not shooting as well. They still by far have the two best players on the floor. They're the better team and they're at home. And I think we're kind of overreacting to the first few games, similar with Portland. I would play the other way. I would say Nets -3.5's a buy low. Blake Griffin, you've basically gotten worse. You've gotten worst case Blake Griffin so far. Now he could just be totally washed. That's a fair point to make. But he could be better at this point. He hasn't played well yet. And, we'll see how everyone else goes. You could also say, hey, Patty Mills might miss a 3. He's been on fire to start the year. So there's arguments both ways. Ultimately, as a whole, it's just an interesting disconnect. I think Brooklyn's better if we're respecting the market that existed all summer and still exists as far as them to win the East and win it all. How are they only minus 3.5 at home, even without Kyrie? It's just too low in my opinion. So nothing crazy. Wouldn't go crazy on the Brooklyn side, but I'll have to fade everyone else.
I am going with the public. I'm a hero. I'm a man of the people.
Battle of the 6 men.
The elitist Preston Johnson. I'm taking the Heat. I grabbed this at 4.5 when we were talking about in buckets yesterday. We'll not take it at 3.5, but I do like Raheem's play on the money line. My numbers do have the Heat favored here. Now, again, because the Heat annihilated the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Nets had a very disappointing performance versus those same Bucks. That's part of the 2 reasons why this number jumps out that way. But look, I don't like the way I've seen the Nets playing. Here's an interesting one. I was looking at this today. The Nets last season were averaging over a point per possession versus switch coverage. This season, it's down in the 0.85. And you could say like, well, that's likely to go up. I would agree, except for Harden doesn't look great. KD's still scoring very well in that, and they still have those numbers. It's not because of regression from the top guys. It's that they don't have the kind of supporting cast. I do think that they are a little bit stagnant on offense. I don't like the contributing guys, and their half-court defense, I think, is really suspect. They really need Blake Griffin to be their defensive centerpiece. That's alarming. That's not a situation that you should be in. So I will grab the Heat. Preston gets to be contrarian, and I like how that worked out. That's great content right there. Before we sign off, one quick note. Bobby Portis back for the Milwaukee Bucks tonight. They were 6.5 at BetMGM. I just bet that as Preston was talking versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Went and grabbed that because the Bucks look to be getting back closer to full strength. This has been Heat Check, presented by BetMGM. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next week at 6:00 Eastern. Make sure to subscribe to Buckets, the podcast. Check out our great analysis, information, and track your bets on the Action Network app. Our thanks to BetMGM. We'll see you guys again next week on another edition of Heat Check.